Hello, welcome to this episode of A Facilitator's Journey. Today I am joined by Murray Cowell, and Murray and I have got to know each other over the last year, and what I really like about Murray is he talks all things how to actually run a training business, a facilitation business, a coaching business. He's got experience, he knows how to do it, and he then shares that experience. So I'm excited for you to hear the conversation that we had today. So please take this as a sign to go get a hot drink, tune in your ears, and take a seat with me on the pink chair. Enjoy this episode. Hi, Murray. Welcome to A Facilitator's Journey. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kirsty. I'm doing really well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure.
Bit cold this morning.
Yeah, so this will probably go out in February, March time. But for those of you who are listening, it's November, and there's a flurry of snow coming through, so we're all going to be excited. Murray, the question I always ask all my guests is, how do we know one another?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question in our case, because I think we kind of have very similar audiences, so we're interacting with the same kind of people because we both serve facilitators one way or another. And I heard about the School of Facilitation, and I know that you heard about the work that I was doing, and we had a lot of clients in common, and lots of people were saying to me, "Oh, you should talk to Kirsty," and lots of people were saying to you, "Oh, you should talk to Murray." And eventually we got to the stage where we did have a conversation and found that we've got quite a lot in common in terms of what we're trying to achieve, which is to make life easier and better for facilitators, coaches, and trainers.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we need to name, you're one of the speakers at SoFest 2025.
I am indeed, yeah. Very much looking forward to that. I think it's going to be the event of the year.
Absolutely. So today's conversation is almost like a good prequel to what's going to go down in the field when you're doing a talk and a workshop. So people are going to be able to learn from you left, right, and centre, which I'm very excited about. Murray, how do you describe what it is that you do?
Well, I work with trainers and some coaches as well, who find it harder than they feel it really needs to be to get the right kind of clients. And typically people are working very hard at their marketing and they feel like they're doing the right kind of activities, but just not getting the constant stream of the right kind of clients that they want. Or they're getting plenty of clients, but they're not the right kind of clients. And most people that I encounter who work as trainers would like to be working with better clients. And by better clients, I mean, yes, clients that pay more, but also clients that appreciate the work that they do, clients that actually respond to the hard work that they're putting in delivering training programs, that put the learning into practice, that get good results, that are a joy to work with. And all those are legitimate reasons for wanting to upgrade your client list. And
absolutely,
the work that I do is really focused around making that process easier, reducing the burden of marketing your business and making the marketing more effective so that you can get into more one-to-one conversations with the right kind of clients in a shorter space of time and with less effort and time.
Amazing. What's your background? Like, how did you, just quick potted history, how did you even get to be able to be doing this? Because that for me is quite a subject matter expertise. So how did you get here?
Well, I started out in retail management and running newsagent shops actually originally, and then I graduated to motorway service stations.
Whoa!
So I was a retail manager at the M27 service station at Rownhams, which you all know pretty well because it's not too far away from where you are in Errolsford. The only service station on the M27.
Just for people who don't know the UK, the M27 is a motorway that runs along the south coast near Southampton, all the way through to Portsmouth. It's a short motorway.
It is,
but it's on the south coast because we have listeners in America, Australia, India, Africa. So if anyone's just think the middle of the UK on the bottom, and a service station, a servo, as the Aussies would say, roadhouse, I don't know what the other phraseology
truck
is.
stop, I expect they call it
Truck
in America,
stop.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
We used to get a lot of truckers.
Things have changed for you since then, hasn't
They
it?
really have, yeah. And the big change for me was that I was very fortunate that Whitbread, which is one of the UK's largest brewers, wanted a retail manager to train their pub managers to think like retailers rather than thinking like publicans. And they were actively searching for someone with retail experience at exactly the moment that I was thinking that I really wanted to get into learning and development, because I found the part of the job that I enjoyed the most was training people and motivating people and getting people to perform to the best of their abilities. So I got my first job in learning and development in 1990. That's how long ago it is. And then I went from there. I actually worked in HR for 10 or 11 years after that, ending up as senior employee relations advisor at IBM. And while I was working there, I was approached. I went on a training course myself, and I was approached by the person who ran the training business, who invited me to come and join him in delivering training programs as a freelance trainer on an associate basis.
Yeah.
And that was quite appealing. I felt my time at IBM had really run its course, and I wanted to try something different. So I became an associate trainer. And
so you've been through the associate route as well. So and then did you like transcend the next tier and do your own clients directly, or have you always stayed in the associate space?
No, well, like most people who do associate work, I found it very fulfilling in some ways, because I was getting to work with some big blue chip clients, travel internationally, all the usual stuff that goes with associate work. And the work was relatively easy to come by because it's basically offered to you on a plate. But also it can be very frustrating because you're delivering someone else's content, and usually you feel you could do it better, but they don't want to hear about the improvements that you could offer. And you're working for a fraction of what you can earn if you go directly to your own clients, if you build your own client base. So
we'll come back to that one, because yes and no.
Yes, yeah. Ideally, it's potentially possible anyway.
Yeah.
And so I started building my own client base, and so I've had the experience of running my own training business as well, and delivering programs direct to clients.
Nice.
But I've also been on a retainer with 7-figure training organizations. So not the biggest, not the big organizations like the Huthwaites and the Richardsons and the Mercury Internationals, but that kind of middle tier that's bigger than most training businesses, but still small enough to be a sort of boutique consultancies, I suppose. And so in those roles, I was responsible for resourcing and managing larger training programs, so often with a global reach, and managing a faculty of 30-odd associate trainers. So I've kind of had the benefit of seeing the training, the freelance training industry from lots of different perspectives, from being an associate myself to running my own training programs for clients directly, and also being part of the senior leadership team that's managing a larger training organization. And add to the mix that along the way, in the mid 2000s, I got a little bit bored with training, and I wanted to try something else different.
Yeah.
And so I founded an internet marketing agency that morphed into an email marketing agency, and I ran that for 10 years. So I realized in about 2018 that I had this unique combination of all this experience in the training industry, and also how to market small businesses through my experience in internet marketing and email marketing. And so since then, I began partnering with trainers who were at the point where they'd maxed out what they could earn as a freelancer, because ultimately, when you're working as a freelancer, you're exchanging time for money. And beyond that, there are several ways that you can grow beyond that. And we might talk about some of those, how you can break away from it just being time for money and start getting rewarded for the value of what you deliver rather than just the time that you put in. But the most obvious way to grow is to start hiring your own associate team and bidding for bigger programs. And so I started partnering with people who are at that stage and who wanted to be able to resource their own team of associates and start selling bigger programs than they delivered before. Because there's quite a mind shift that people go through at that stage, from being the person who's delivering the training to being a person who's running a business that delivers the training, and not necessarily always being the person in the training room.
Yeah.
And so I started working with people who are at that stage.
Yes, that's when I've heard about you. Now we've got potential. I think there's 3 things we could talk about today. One that you've just said. There's this, and they wrap up all together, by the way. So there's the associate versus direct client conversation. I think there's a pricing conversation and niching.
Wonderful.
You up for that?
Yeah, definitely.
Where should we start?
start?
Yeah, exactly. Well, some of the threads. Where would be a logical place to start, do you think?
Well, I mean, let's start with the associate versus direct client question, because it's not as black and white as it often seems, because there's sometimes an underlying assumption that associate work is somehow bad and that having your direct clients is somehow better. And that associate work is easier to come by and direct work is harder to come by. So these are, I think both of those are myths, because there's something to be said for associate work. As I mentioned earlier, it's great to just get a phone call from someone who says, can you be at this place at this time delivering this training, stuff you've done loads of times before. There's no prep work. There's no follow-up work. You don't have to manage the client. You don't have to market the business. You don't have to get involved in any sales conversations. I mean, you may do, but
a couple of check-in calls. Involved.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So the pre-work and the post-work is often pretty light. You go along, you do your dog and pony show for the day, and you go home at the end of the day, and that's that quite often. So there's a lot to be said for that. And I know that personally, I was working with an organisation that used to give me 100 days of relatively easy work that I was very comfortable doing, that I didn't have to do any of the sales and marketing or the preparation or any of that. And I made pretty good money doing that as well.
That was where I started. And I would do 100 days. I was getting an average of like 1,200 day rate at the time.
Yeah.
Happy days. Like literally, I look back now and I'm like, oh, that was in some instances way easier to what is going on now in SOF. Way easier. Yeah,
I agree. And my
less stress. Less stress.
Yeah, a lot less, definitely less stressful. And I used to feel kind of I was doing that in my 30s and early 40s, and I felt semi-retired, to be honest, because I was literally only working 100 days a year, and doing very little in between work-wise. The other aspect that I mentioned previously was I was working with IBM, I was working with Unisys, I was working with Network Rail, I was working with big clients, British Airways, clients that it's actually quite difficult to land those kind of clients.
Oh yeah,
as a solopreneur.
What made you move away from associate work? Let's both have that conversation. Like, why did you move? Why did I move? You go first.
Yeah, I think for me it was lack of control and lack of influence about how things were done, and I had a bit of a slight sort of falling out with the person who was running the business, because I think if we'd been a musical act, we would have called it musical differences. that we were pulling in slightly different directions about how the training was developing and the kind of work that we were doing. And I wanted more independence. I think I'm quite an independent person, and I wanted to have more influence over what was being delivered, how it was being delivered, and I also was starting to think about blended learning and more than just turning up and doing a one day. At the time,
one hit wonder workshop.
Yeah, it was drive-by training, I call it. Where the trainer turns up, jumps out of the car.
Oh my god, that's so
does
true.
The training, and then you don't see him for dust.
I know. I think my story is similar in some ways to yours, Murray, except I accidentally, through writing an article for LinkedIn around 2016, upset the owner of the business because I put it was nothing about them, by the way, in the article, other than I was saying it was really powerful having someone observe me and coach me as a facilitator and a trainer, and how I thought this would be a beneficial thing for everybody in this space, and therefore come and have a chat, because I'm open to doing some of this kind of coaching. And the owner of the business took umbrage to that, and slowly what happened was the amount of work I had coming in was basically cut off at the knees. And weirdly, at the same time though, my previous company Diageo came knocking and had a big project they wanted me to run for them in Europe and then globally. So it was very, I talked about this yesterday with another guest, Chris Taylor. Sometimes when one door closes, another door opens, but that door probably wouldn't have opened if I was blocked up and not ready. But at the time, it really stung because I was not ready for that. So that's how I ended up going into the direct client world. It probably was about time, if truth be told. And I knew how to do it. I was choosing not to because it was comfortable being an associate. And that's okay, by the way. So a lot of people, another guest of ours, Caroline Boyd, did some really great research for her master's about employee engagement from a freelance perspective. And there's a lot of people choose to be an associate, and they choose it like proactively, and they say, I do it so it's flexible. I don't have to do the selling. I don't have to find the clients. I can say no. I fit it around my lifestyle. So I do think there are pros and cons, because I think both of us have alluded to this, like having your own clients. Yeah, it's fantastic. There's a real sense of satisfaction and pride for me when we land a new client. But there's also a lot of stress that goes alongside, because I feel like I'm the one who's the breadwinner and I have to bring in all the clients all the time to feed the team.
Yes, that's certainly true. That kind of feeling of responsibility, and when I speak to people who have most people seem to have a mix of or a lot of people have a mix of their own direct clients and associate work. Very few people want to completely eliminate the associate work. What's more usual is they want to change the balance so they're doing more of their own direct work.
I heard that.
But people do want to hang on to some of the associate work, because usually as we've said, you're working with great clients. You get exposed to a variety of ideas. There's often a feeling of a bit more of a team spirit when you're an associate with another group of associates, and those are things that are worth hanging on to. But it's the feeling of this, as you were just alluding to, the feeling of having success, the pride that you can take in having built something yourself. That's often what people are aspiring to.
But this conversation started right back in the introduction was, people are an associate and then think they want to have their own direct clients because of a higher day rate. And I was like, yes, no. And where I was coming from in my thinking at that point was, yes, you can charge more, but please know that you are putting a lot more of your time and effort in up front and afterwards. So often you've got to work it out. You have to charge quite a lot of money on your day rate as a direct client for it to be worthwhile. Also, we did some pricing research in 2023, and I'd like to just touch on this with you and see what your thoughts are. And something we noticed, I say we because I did it with a lady called Jodie Rogers. So we asked people to define themselves. Are you an associate? Do you have your own direct clients, or do you have both? And what was fascinating was those people who said they had both associate and direct clients, their associate rate was higher than the audience that said they were just pure associates. Their direct to client rate, though, was lower than those who had just pure direct clients. And Jodie and I were like, what is going on here? And we talked to a few people, and this is our working theory, and it proves it quite time and again. Where these people who have both associate and direct client relationship, what they were doing was they were comfortable to challenge the associate training agencies on their day rates because they were like, no, I am worth more. And often that got pushed up the associate rate. But what we noticed was when we said, well, why don't you push up your day rate to the clients? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Oh, no. There was a belief, a limiting belief holding them back, or they were like, well, I can't charge that amount. And we're like, okay, but you are leaving money on the table. And I would suggest not helping the industry. And you're also,
that's a very good point.
And also, you're giving the people who feed you a bloody hard time. Don't go into bat and challenge them, because that's almost like a wasted opportunity. Like, go talk to your direct clients and start pushing up your day rate. I don't know if you see that when you talk to those people in your world.
Yeah, definitely, yes, and it's very interesting. I've read that in your survey that and your analysis of that before, and I think it's a very interesting observation that you're making. And I wonder if it's a version of the anchoring effect that psychologically, it's that if you state a number, then people will anchor around that number, so that number will become a kind of reference point. So where it might be applying here is people very typically they'll start doing associate work and then build their own direct work, and they're anchoring their direct rate to what they get paid as an associate.
Okay.
Whereas people who've gone straight to direct don't have that anchor, so they're likely to they're more likely to be kind of looking to the market rate and trying to understand what the market rate is for the training.
That's interesting.
And there's often this reluctance to charge what we're worth, and I think a lot of people experience that, and also the lack of, and this is why I think your pricing survey has been really useful for the industry, because it's given people some hard data on what other people are benchmarking what other people are charging.
Let's talk about pricing. I think pricing, because it's a topic. So if you haven't discovered this already, there's a SOF Collective WhatsApp group. So it's a free WhatsApp group. It's a global community. And one of the biggest conversations that always sparks debate and a lot of sharing is the pricing conversation. And people asking what are the average day rates in this market or this sector? Because we need to say this, like, there are different day rates, different ways of cutting the price, bundling prices. Do you go for day rates? Do you go for value? We all have our own opinions. But it's always a great conversation. So what should we talk about? Because there's such a big topic, isn't it?
It is a big topic. And well, you've referred to day rates and hourly rates, and that's commonly how people think. This is my day rate, this is my hourly rate. And it's also very much how clients think. They think in terms of day rates and hourly rates, and they very commonly have no idea what goes on behind the scenes, which you mentioned earlier, the additional work that goes into it. So and the better you are at training, the more likely it is that they don't really understand how much effort you're putting into it, because what they see is that you turn up on the day, you start the training, and you're very fluent, and it looks as though you're just riffing off the top of your head. And what they don't understand is the amount of design and planning and preparation that has gone in to making it look so spontaneous and fluent. And
well as, add on top of that, Murray, client management. Add on to that, getting on their vendor system and jumping through hoops in vendor systems now. Add on to that the numerous conversations clients sometimes want to have in the build-up. It's a lot more time than, and I think it's about something I always think about is how do you demonstrate your value? So it's like the value, not the outputs, and talk about the value that you're bringing. I also think something you were just saying, hourly and day rates. I don't think I ever think in hourly rates. And if you're a trainer or a facilitator and thinking hourly rates, please stop. That is not healthy. Is we've trained the industry to think in that way. Like, the
Yes.
only reason why they think like that is because that is what has happened time and again, that people show and go, oh, this is the day rate.
That's really true. And we're at a point in time where we have a real opportunity to change that.
Yeah.
And what's really helping with that is the pandemic and the lockdown, and everybody now being familiar with having virtual conversations. Because before lockdown, it was less common for people to have video conversations.
Correct.
And so getting people interested in a program of blended learning, what I mean by a program of blended learning is there may be some training interventions, and it could even be a full day workshop, but it could just as easily be shorter, maybe some virtual sessions, maybe a bit of face-to-face, but that is generally spread out over a longer period of time with other interventions in between. And that could be pre-recorded videos, it could be activities, it could be articles, it could be action-centered work groups that people are doing in the workplace that are designed and briefed by the trainer, but facilitated by coaches and leaders in the organization. So that's what I mean by a program of blended learning. And the evidence that's coming through is pretty clear, because there's now been quite a bit of research on this, and that produces better learning outcomes. And anybody who's ever delivered a program like that will know that by the end of the program, people are actually doing things differently. And you know that they're doing things differently because you've been working with them over a period of time, and you can see that and you can measure it. And so this is a trend that is happening anyway, along with reduced attention spans. I don't believe the research that says that people can only concentrate for 8.5 seconds or whatever it is, which is less than a goldfish. It's patently not true. Anybody who's still watching this has proven
or listening to us. You're doing
or
well.
Listening to it, yes, has been concentrating for longer than that. So it's not true that people's attention spans are that short. But that we're subject to more distractions, and our time is under greater pressure potentially than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And so there's a definite trend towards shorter, more frequent learning interventions. And that mitigates in favor of building these programs of blended learning, which have numerous benefits for everybody, actually. It's good for the learners because they learn more and they get a better outcome. It's good for the client because they get a better outcome. And it's easier for them to demonstrate the return on investment or the return on expectation of the training. And it's good for us as facilitators and trainers because we can now charge for those programs based on the value that they deliver rather than the time that it takes to put those programs together and deliver them. And it is very difficult for the client to reverse engineer what your day rate is. So it breaks us out of this day rate, hourly rate focused model for pricing training and moves us towards much more value-based training. And I've helped several clients to make that transition, and they found that the amount of money that they can earn for a unit of training has massively increased as a result of making that change.
So say if you're writing proposals or you're like, how do you demonstrate, the value? What sort of phraseology? This is something that's just useful. Like, what do we say? What do we show?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of I know it's not the only one, the only game in town, but the Kirkpatrick model of training evaluation I find is very useful because you've got at level one, you've got the reaction to the training, which needs to be positive. It doesn't actually guarantee anything to how people react to the training, and that's why happy sheets aren't a very good measure, particularly because they usually ask the wrong question. They're asking people what they thought of the training and whether they enjoyed it and those kind of questions, which actually motivates the trainer to make the day enjoyable rather than useful. And there are better questions such as, did you learn something useful? Was it relevant? Are you planning to put it into practice? Because if people don't think they've learned anything relevant and they're not planning to make any changes, the prospect of behavioral change is zero. So it's important that at that basic first level that people have had a good experience. Secondly, we need to be able to have some way of measuring that or of assessing that they have actually acquired the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes and the understanding that the training was designed to deliver. So that's the second level. Then the third level is observing that in the workplace. And I really like that level because we can't. Well, we could come into the workplace and assess that, but it'd be very expensive for the client. So the most effective way to assess whether the changes happen in the workplace is for the managers or leaders
Yeah.
or coaches in the organization to assess it. And so that gives us a reason to get managers bound into the training.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
this then creates much more of a true partnership between us as trainers and the organization to take joint responsibility for that behavioral change.
Yeah.
I'm a really big fan of this. It makes such a big difference to get managers involved and give them a role in the training. And by the way, L&D people love it because it solves a problem that they're always wrestling with, which is how do we get managers to take the training seriously? So when you come in as a third party and say, we're going to take that responsibility over for you, they are very, very enthusiastic about that generally. And then the fourth level is some kind of hard metric that measures ideally a return on investment. So with sales training, for example, that's easy to measure. This is what they sold before and this is what they sold after. And usually that number is orders of magnitude bigger than the cost of the training. So they see and again, when we're talking about anchoring, as we were earlier in the pricing conversation, it's very useful to establish that big number, the return on the investment that they're going to get, before you start talking about the investment they're going to need to make in the training. Because when you can show them you're going to make an extra £500,000 profit as a result of this training, and it's only going to cost you 15 grand, that then anchors the difference.
I think another thing as well, I was talking with Chris Taylor about yesterday as well. He was encouraging people to look at the strategic priorities of the organization that they were invited to go into, and from the off be talking about how this work that they were being asked to pitch for was associated to the strategic priorities, and how that would develop and support, grow, evolve, transform, and move the conversation out of it being just purely about L&D or HR and into the organization.
Yeah, absolutely vital. Yeah. Because we've got an L&D also have a tendency to talk about skills transfer and competency frameworks and learning outcomes, and all those things are important at that level. But what Chris is suggesting is to bind it into something that's more strategic. And that's a bigger picture. The board level conversation.
And that the board or the sort of senior leaders are going to be going, okay, I get that. It's not just about HR. It's not just about the nice, fuzzy, warm thing that we want to do for our people. It has we can make a tangible difference.
Yes.
On the pricing then as well. So we were talking about like how you show that value. You write that into what you were just describing from the Kirkpatrick perspective. You write that into your proposal, like by demonstrating these are the potential shifts that can be made. And then when you come to write the pricing and you write I call it investment. So when you come to write the financials down, do you have any advice to people on like how to show that number or numbers?
Yeah. And firstly, I totally agree with what you've just said about calling it an investment. It's not a price, it's not a cost, it's not a fee. It's an investment. This is the investment because it's driving that thinking into the client's mind, because some organizations think of training as a cost, and costs are there to be controlled, whereas we want them thinking of it as an investment, because the investment's there to be made in order to get a return. And if you're getting a return on that investment, it's much more likely that you're going to want to make that investment. My advice would be to detail a little bit more about what's involved. So I found that talking to clients about the process in quite a lot of detail works very effectively, so that they know we're going to start off by having some discovery conversations. We need to talk to some of your leaders. We need to talk to some of the managers of people who are going on the training. We need to talk to a couple of people who are going to be on the training themselves. And we want a mediocre performer, not somebody who's just about to be fired, but somebody who's got the opportunity to improve. And we want to talk to at least one of your top performers to find out what they're doing differently. Then we go away and do a high-level design. We come and review that with you. Then we do a more detailed design. You sign that off, so that you're getting sign-off at every stage of the process, and so on and so on and so on. So talking a lot of detail about that, and then also put that into the proposal that this the investment includes the following: discovery, design, and so on, administration, but don't itemize it, because as soon as you itemize that kind of thing, you encourage the client to start cherry picking, and especially on design, because they'll say 2 days of design for 1 day of training. Why do you need that? You don't need that. So just giving them one number at the end, that's the investment in order to get this scope of work and this return on your investment.
Interesting. So the way I do it is I've taken out any reference to time. So on the back page, the investment page, it breaks it down like diagnostic, design, delivery.
Yeah.
Chris gave me debrief, quite like that, all the Ds. But then there's just a big number against each of those. So you know what you're getting, but it doesn't sort of explicitly call out 2 2-hour virtual workshops, one in person. But you can work it out. But also the numbers are all just big numbers, and then there's the big number at the bottom right.
Yeah.
Another thing, I've got a business wife, Sean. She always says, especially on the really big projects that are like 6-7 months long, her attitude is make sure the number is relative or lower than the person who's got to sign this off salary. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because they will just see that number and they will go, what? They're earning more than I am. And like, especially if they're more junior and middle managers who aren't used to making those big decisions. And I had that happen. Like, I was literally going to do some work to upskill a training team for a big office service in business. And I put the quote in, and it was nothing big. It was like 4K just for a day's work. And the guy said, well, no, I'm not paying that, because that's more than a monthly salary of one of my team.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, but it was just really interesting how he got that. Sort of
what he's
thought in his
comparing
head.
it with. It's interesting that he's making actually not really comparing apples with apples at all.
At all.
And I found that in my work at IBM, that was very, very common, that people would talk about how much contractors were paid compared with employees.
Yeah.
And employees at IBM are paid pretty well in the first place, but the contractors were paid even more. But what they don't realize is that there's a productivity measure as well, because the contractors are paying, they don't get pensions, they don't get cars, they don't need office space, they don't need infrastructure like payroll, they don't get paid for time off sick, they don't get paid when they're in training, they don't get paid when they're on holiday, and so on and so on and so on.
And that day rate also includes their tax.
Yeah. And we did some calculations that showed that actually some of the contractors were better value than the equivalent employees in the organization, even though their apparent headline rate was higher. So that's interesting. So there's kind of it's what I slightly disparagingly refer to as a PAYE mindset, the kind of employed mindset where people don't think about what else is the other costs that are associated with employing them as an employee. So that £4,000 a month employee probably costs the organisation 2 to 3 times more than that headline rate. But anyway, it's not the right comparator anyway, because the comparator should be, what's the outcome that you're going to get from this, not how does that compare with the cost of. You might as well be comparing it with your stationery bill. It's that it's as irrelevant as that.
It is. I want to touch on the third topic, niching, before we end today. So I know this is something that you've been doing some work on and thinking about. Do you want to share with the listeners, like, what are your thoughts on niching? Should we niche? Yes, no?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And for what reason?
Well, because this is kind of linked to the concept of the USP, that we're all encouraged to have a unique selling proposition, and that is a concept that dates back to, I think it's as far back as the 1940s, when the idea of the USP was first mooted, and competition was very different in those days, because you only had to compete with other people that your potential client was likely to run into in the physical world.
Yeah.
But now we're in what I would describe as a hyper-connected world, and that is especially true since the kind of shift to virtual or the shift of the balance towards more virtual that has broken down a lot of geographic boundaries, and it means that, which is a good thing, because it means that we can each compete across a much or be relevant across a much wider geographical area than before. But the downside of that is also that so can everybody else. And so clients are now faced with a bewildering choice. There are literally thousands of people who could potentially solve whatever problem it is they've got or whatever result they're looking for. So trying to appeal to everybody. And when I ask people, what's your niche? They'll often say things like, well, I've had a client just this week, and she said, I have a real problem with niching because I'm a leadership coach and I coach leaders in resilience. Well, if you ask how many leaders are there, millions. And how many of them are interested in resilience? Probably all of them. Because we all need to be more resilient because life feels like it's getting tougher and harder to cope with. So everybody wants to be more resilient, and there are millions of leaders. So, and she said, and I look at myself and I can't see anything different to what I'm doing to what everybody else is doing. And actually, these things are inextricably linked. And there are three things that are linked together. One is who are you targeting? What's your niche? One is what's the service that you're delivering for them? That's to do with what message are you taking to that target audience. And the third is what's the unique value that you bring, which can only be defined in relation to the specific audience that you're talking to and the specific service that you're providing to them. And after about 45 minutes of talking together, she realized that there are what I call, instead of USPs, I talk about LCDs, which are the least common differentiators. And they are characteristics of you and your service that meet three criteria. They're shared by the least number of other people who may be also be able to deliver that service. Secondly, that they are hard to copy. And thirdly, that they are meaningful to your client. And that third criteria is the one that links your least common differentiators, which is your definition of your unique value, to your specific target audience, because those differentiators have to be meaningful to that audience. So, for example, during the conversation, she revealed that she spent 10 years as an officer in the army. She said, I don't really talk about that because some people don't like the army. And my response to that is, okay, well, maybe don't work with the people who don't like the army, because a lot of people have got no problem with military service. And it turns out that she was a logistics officer, often working in areas where there was a present threat, not exactly a combat zone, but the next thing alongside it. So that's quite a high pressured, serious job where resilience is very relevant. So that's potentially very relevant. That's an example of something that could be very relevant to a specific audience.
And very unique.
And hard to copy. Well, in theory, anybody who's young enough to join the army could copy that, but it would take them 10 years at least
also
to build that experience.
And it's just so refreshing, like a woman talking about this and not some bro ripped guy machoing it up. Fascinating. Oh, very cool. So the three things to think about: my unique value. Who am I talking to? Who's my target market? And how I describe my services.
Yes. Okay. And to link those three things together. So she's now realized, and there are a couple of other attributes that she has. She's very keen on the outdoors. She does a lot of Pilates, swimming, hiking. But when I say hiking, I mean she does like the GR20 in Corsica, that sort of hiking.
Wow.
And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's supposed to be the toughest trek in Europe, isn't it? And I think she's got a record time for getting across it.
Amazing.
Or something like that. So really, how I'm encouraging her to think about this is to think, who's that really relevant to? Who cares about that? Because if you've got a leader who enjoys eating KFC buckets whilst watching whilst binge watching TV box sets, that's probably not going to appeal so much
Yeah.
to somebody like that as it would to somebody who maybe is a very keen cyclist, goes to the gym 3 times a week. That's a leader to whom it can be relevant, provided that it's also relevant to the service that she's delivering. And actually part of her service is how you can utilize physical fitness as a way of improving your resilience as a leader.
Wow.
So that's a really good example of how her unique combination of characteristics is relevant to a particular type of leader in relation to a specific service that she's delivering. And I think that's a great example of how to niche.
So here's another question. What stops people from niching then? What have you learned and noticed over your times coaching many people? What stops people?
The most common thing that stops people from niching is the fear that they will put off people who aren't in the niche. And that fear is massively overstated, because even no matter how specifically you define your niche, there will always be people from outside of that niche who are attracted. So the couch potato leader who's binging on box sets and Kentucky Fried Chicken may yet be attracted to a coach who specializes in fitness and the outdoors, because for all we know, that person might be interested in improving their fitness, for example. So even though they're not in the niche, they may still be attracted to that person. But the flip side of that is that even if you do put off some people who aren't in the niche, so for example, Lizzie, the coach that I'm talking about, she's got a very disciplined way of going about things that is possibly linked to her experience in the military. So if somebody doesn't like that, they're not going to make a very good client for her, and she'll find them hard to work with. So actually you want to put off people who aren't a good fit for what it is that you do and how you do it.
Absolutely.
And by being that specific, because there's the phrase that I think is really true, which is, if you try to appeal to everybody, you ultimately appeal to nobody. And you cannot, it's literally impossible to define a compelling message, to craft a compelling message for a big, broad spectrum range of people. So the benefit of niching is that you attract so many more of the people who are a good fit for you, while simultaneously putting off people who are not a good fit for you.
And I think also if you haven't niched and therefore not talking about what it is you do at that specific level, people don't know whether they should come to you or not. Like you're not making it easy for people to find you, like, because it's too broad. It's like, oh, I'm a leadership coach, as is everybody bloody else. I'm not, by the way, definitely not a leadership coach. But I also think there's some other limiting beliefs, because it's fear driven. I think it's like, but what if? And for a long time, I didn't niche, and because I didn't know what to niche. That was the reason why I didn't niche, because I wasn't too sure what to niche into, because I was their sales trainer, and I always had this hankering to be doing more on the training facilitator side, and I couldn't work out how to articulate that. And it takes time. So Kat, who is one of our other guests, she talked about niching, and we were talking about how long it can take. And I think that's something also for people to recognize. It takes time. And I think it's about experimenting. So have a hypothesis, go and run an experiment, see what the results are. Have you proved the hypothesis or disproved it? And then go again and make small refined tweaks. I think that's
I totally agree with that. A niche is not like a tattoo that once you've got it, you can't change it. So niches can be provisional, as you're saying. You can kind of try it out and experiment. They can also be temporary. So one of my clients, for example, his main niche is working with blue collar workers, the kind of people who don't want to be there. They think training is a waste of time. It reminds them of school, because it's very rare for them to be in a kind of training room environment. They sit there with their arms folded, staring blankly at you. And as he says, if at the end of the day, if they say, well, this wasn't as shit as I thought it was going to be, and you're not as much of a tosser as I was expecting, that is a great success.
Okay.
And so that's who he normally specializes with. But he's also got a lot of experience working in the pub trade.
Yeah.
And so from time to time, like this time of year at the moment, he's running a promotion for pubs that are taking on temporary teams to build up Christmas demand, and working with them to train those teams to be effective at upselling and maximizing the revenue that they get from each table. So that's a niche that he's adopting just for this period. He also does it again in the middle of the year when pubs are thinking about their Christmas bookings, which they tend to do in June and July, and helping them to do outbound calling to organisations to get their Christmas parties booked in. So he does temporary niching at different times of the year that are specific to a particular aspect of his experience where he knows he can be credible. But the rest of the time, that's not the niche that he works in. So it's also possible to have these kind of smaller niches temporarily.
That's like a temporary tattoo.
Like one of the ones that you can wash off. Or a henna tattoo, perhaps. A
henna, that's exactly what I was thinking. Cool. Right. We are coming towards the end of our time together, and we always have the quick fire questions, Murray. So I've got 4 questions for you. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone starting out as a facilitator trainer?
Okay, so in the beginning, the priority is short-term revenue. And when you're solving for short-term revenue, the actions that you take are different from when you're trying to build a longer-term pipeline. So short-term revenue is usually best obtained by tapping into your immediate first-degree network, doing personal conversations. So you're calling people up. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone to people, and finding out who either directly wants your services or might be able to refer you on to somebody who can.
Nice.
So in the early stages, you're likely to get good business from your first degree network and also from going to networking meetings and some chance encounters on LinkedIn and that sort of thing.
Nice.
At the same time, be aware that tends to peter out after a period of time. So also have an eye to how you build your longer term pipeline, and that is done by really making as many connections as you possibly can with the right kind of people, because those connections that you make now will be what supplies your pipe time over the longer term.
Yeah.
So it's tap into your first degree network now, but also have an eye to building more connections for the longer term.
Yeah, I like that. Well, let's do the next question. How have you invested in yourself or your business to support you in moving forward?
I've always either been part of a mastermind group or had a business coach. And I invest a 5-figure sum in my own development every year. And I have done for at least the last decade.
Yeah.
And I find that absolutely invaluable, because we all have the same problem, which is we can't see the wood for the trees. You can't read the label from inside the jar. You can't see the picture. You can't see the frame from inside the picture. Those kind of analogies are very true. And I suffer from what I call spreadsheet millionaire syndrome, where if you give me a spreadsheet, I can show you how any business idea can make you a millionaire by this time next year. But of course, those numbers on a spreadsheet don't always translate into the real world. So it's very easy to, and because most of us in business for ourselves tend to be fairly entrepreneurial, we have lots of ideas all the time, new ideas, shiny object syndrome. And I find that it needs somebody external to the business to say, well, wait a minute, and to push back and challenge a little bit, and to help you stay focused on the 1 or 2 clear ideas that are really going to make your business develop.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, I'm hearing more and more people going, get on a mastermind, have a business coach. It makes a world of difference. Yeah. Who do you follow in social media land that you think others should too?
Who do I follow in social media land that I think others should too? I'm one of my keenest areas of focus is productivity, because it's so related to what I was just saying. It's so easy to get sidetracked and distracted, and so hard to stay focused and productive. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts and I'm read a lot of books on the subject as well. And so I follow Cal Newport, who wrote the book Deep Work, which was transformational for me. There's another book. I know this isn't social media; it's more kind of.
Well, that's the next question. What book would you recommend? That's all
Okay.
right.
So another book, Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. He has a
Okay.
really, really interesting approach to time management, which is not so much focused on how do I get more done now, but it's how do I take actions now that are going to make me more productive in the future, which is very,
Ooh.
very interesting twist on it.
Yeah. Love it.
And so part of that is deliberately procrastinating over things that are not serving your longer term interests. It's a very interesting book. And other podcasts that I listen to
Yeah.
are I quite like Dan Pink's Office Hours series. He's stopped doing it now, but they're still worth listening to. He has some great guests on that. I listen to the Freakonomics podcast, which always has some quite interesting takes. I've had a couple of people who are actually in my network who do good podcasts. So Chris Grimes has the Good Listening Show. That's a great podcast. There's also Linda Martin. She's a Canadian lady. Her podcasts are very interesting as well. I can't remember what the name of the podcast is off the top of my head. But I'm quite an avid listener to.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of economics podcasts as well because, and especially behavioral economics. I'm a big fan of people like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and the work that they did. But also Richard Thaler, who popularized a lot of their work. He wrote the book Nudge, for example, which is a very interesting book. And then Dan Ariely, who is another Israeli researcher who also does research into it's the idea of this kind of mismatch between traditional economics that sees human beings as rational actors, and behavioral economics that looks at how people actually behave, which is nothing like economic theory says we should behave. Yeah.
Fascinating. Oh my goodness me. You've given us a list as long as my arm there. That's amazing. Murray, how do people find you in the world? How can they connect with you?
So the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. But I also have the Client Find Club, which is a community, a free community that's dedicated to helping people to find more business and specifically aimed at trainers and facilitators.
Yeah. So that's called, say the name again.
It's called the Client Find Club.
Brilliant. And so we will put in the show notes
we can put a link in the show notes on how to sign up for that.
Brilliant. And obviously they're going to get to meet you at SoFest in 2025. So if
I'm very
you still
much
haven't
looking forward to that.
I know, I'm very excited. If you haven't bought your ticket yet, I'd encourage you to do so because hopefully there'll be more sold by the time this goes out. It's very exciting. There's definitely 70 of us, if not 80 by the time this podcast goes out. So we're getting there.
Yeah, it's going to sell out. It's going to sell out. So
we're going to hold that. Murray, thank you so much for being my guest today. I have thoroughly enjoyed that conversation.
Me too.
I think we can. I feel like I've done this for a year now, and I'm like, I want to bring loads of guests back, and we're going to have to do like more conversations because there's so much more richness to come. But thank you for your time today, and it was really good to see you.
It's been lovely. Thank you very much for having me along. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to SoFest. And hopefully we'll have lots more conversations in between.
We will. Thank you. I really enjoyed that conversation with Murray. I could have talked to him for ages because I like his mentality on what it takes to run a business as a facilitator and trainer. And he's got very practical thoughts and applications. And I think it's very much rooted in experience. So I really encourage you to go and find him and his work. Go and connect with him on LinkedIn, Murray Cowell. Go and find his free membership. He does some great webinars and they're very lively and interactive. There should be more. They're definitely masterclasses than a webinar for sure. And I think his provocation about niching is a really good one. And I think it's something that we can all think about. So I love that line. Niche is not a tattoo. It can be changed. And we've heard this before in other podcasts. from other guests. So I think that's a really valuable lesson. So niching is not like a tattoo. So what is your unique value that you bring to this world? Who are you targeting? And how do you describe your services? And in my head, as he was talking about this, I have a Venn diagram. So I wonder if it's as simple as getting a sheet of paper, 3 big circles, and just start to write down what you're noticing and where there are those sweet spots that sit. And it's okay to niche people. What I encourage you to do. Thank you for listening today. Please give us a like, a love, a comment. It helps us so much. It bumps us up the system, the algorithms. Also share this if you found this conversation really useful and you have other friends who are facilitators and trainers and coaches and consultants. Please share, spread the love. It'd be good. And if you're still thinking about coming to SoFest, drop me a DM. I will tell you where we're at with the tickets. More the merrier. I'd love it if there were 120 of us in the field together in Essex in the UK. If you're still thinking and you're like, oh no, I live abroad, we have some Australians coming, we have some Americans coming, we have people coming in from Spain, where else? Germany. So people are coming from far and wide as well as the UK. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the pink chair in the future.